Welcome to Poetry and Poets with SueAn Stradling-Collins, the director of the Apache County Library District. Today we're going to be talking about Robert Frost, and I'm going to begin with a poem of invitation that he wrote. It's called The Pasture, and he placed it at the beginning of his complete works as an invitation to you and to poetry. The Pasture. I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear. I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too. I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by the mother. It's so young, it totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too. And Frost is a wonderful poet to invite people into poetry. And a lot of people, when they think of poetry, think of Frost before they think of anyone else. And so I'm going to share a few things about his life and a few of his poems with you today. He was born in 1874 in San Francisco, but his roots were in New England, and his father passed when he was 11, and Frost and his family moved back to New England, and that's where he spent the majority of his life. And most of his poetry deals with New England topics, rural topics, New England settings, New England people. And so if you're from New England, you would love Frost. He did not publish his first book of poetry until he was 40 years old. And so that's quite late in life to begin publishing your poetry. He had sent out poems quite a bit of his life, and a little bit of response here, a little bit of response there. His first poem he did make $15 on, but then he had trouble getting his poetry published. So he took his family and moved to England and published quite easily there. So it's quite interesting that one of America's favorite poets had to go to England to become noticed. And then the English, enjoying his poetry so much, it made it back across the sea into America. And he did return back to America with his family, and that's when he became more famous. But he had to go to England in order to be noticed. Throughout his life, he taught school. He taught at the Bread Loaf creative writing program, and farmed for a good part of his life. He disliked farming, but it was a way to earn money, and so he spent time farming. So, to share some of his poetry with you, I want to start. I'm not going to read the ones that you probably know, so I'm going to read some that you may not have heard of. This one's called Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. And a little bit of humor, but also quite a lot of truth in that one. One of the neat things about Frost is that President Kennedy asked him to read a poem at his inauguration. And I love this picture of him reading, and you can see Kennedy there also. So now almost all of our presidents, for their inauguration, have a poet read a poem, and that started again with President Clinton. And since then, I think every president has had someone read at their inauguration. But it started with Frost, and Kennedy inviting him to do that. The poem that he had originally written for this was called Dedication, but the sun was so bright. He was 85 years old, if I remember, at the time he was doing this. And it was windy, and it was cold, and the poem had blown away. And so he didn't have the poem in front of him. So instead, he recited the poem that I'm going to read to you called The Gift Outright. And this is the poem that Kennedy had actually wanted him to read, but Frost wanted to do something different. It ended up being what Kennedy wanted it to be anyway. And this is quite a wonderful poem about the American people and about America. It's called The Gift Outright. The land was ours before we were the land's. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia, but we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by, possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak, until we found out it was ourselves. We were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gift was many deeds of war. To the land vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she would become. So that was the poem that he read at J.F. Kennedy's inauguration in January of 1961. A few others. These are ones that I like quite a bit, and so that's why I chose them. This one's called After I can't speak today. After Apple Picking. My two long pointed ladders sticking through. Okay, I read that wrong. My long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it. And there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough. But I am done with apple picking now. Essence of winter's sleep is on the night, the sin of apples. I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough, and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted, and I let it fall and break. But I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch, cherish in hand, lift down and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap, as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. One thing I would recommend to you is that Frost recorded a great deal of his own poetry, and he has a wonderful, gravelly voice, like an old grandpa, that's just someone you love who reads his poetry. So I recommend, it's so easy to find on the internet. I recommend that you listen to Frost read his own poetry. It is quite delightful. And I'm going to end with Acquainted with the Night. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. But not to call me back or say goodbye, and further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was nearly wrong nor right, was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to like us, and tune in next week, and I believe we're going to be doing sonnets and Shakespeare.